Hello there. This is one of a series of short webinars that Neil and I are going to do on the subject of dilapidations, on diminution valuations in particular, and how these are becoming more relevant and more focused in the pandemic world. Now, Neil and I are going to take opposing roles as we go through these specific topics. One of us more of the landlord role, one of us more of the tenant role, in order to explain and highlight different arguments that can be raised for and against the subjects that we're talking about at the time. So the first one of these webinars that we're doing now is on schedules of condition. Does a schedule of condition or does a schedule of condition not evidence loss? So Neil's going to kick off first in support of the view that a schedule of condition does evidence loss.
Yeah, so I'm taking the role of a landlord who has just relet the property with a detailed schedule of condition, and from my point of view, the schedule of condition has or will have a negative impact upon my freehold reversionary value. First of all, the building surveyor acting on my behalf when the former tenant vacated prepared a detailed schedule of dilapidations outlining the repair, redecoration and reinstatement works that had to be undertaken. None of those works were done. I did find a new tenant, but he in turn had a detailed schedule of condition that limits or restricts him from having to undertake any of those works that are outlined in the schedule of dilapidation. So those works haven't been done, but similarly, the new tenant won't have to do them. Further, the new tenant, in my view, and from my agent's point of view, has agreed a lower rent to reflect the fact that the property has been left in the condition it was by the former tenant. And he assures me that I would have got a higher rent if they'd complied with their obligations. So in other words, if they'd been left in repair, I would have got a higher rent. Similarly, the agent also confirms that I would have got a better tenant. The tenant that I've got is a fairly poor covenant who merely wants this particular property, but if it was in repair, I would have got a far better tenant, better covenant, and therefore would have enhanced my investment value. So I've got a poor tenant, less rent, and also this schedule of condition. So when this tenant does vacate, I will have to undertake these works at my own cost because they are protected from the schedule of condition. They won't have to undertake them, and it will be a direct cost to me. But that's also if the tenant actually remains in occupation throughout the term. As I've said, they're a poor covenant. There's every chance, especially in these difficult times, that they will vacate sooner. They may well become on hard times, and I will therefore be left with a property sooner rather than later that needs these works doing to it. So again, I'm going to be left with the works to be undertaken at my own cost, and even if they do remain, a fairly poor investment value because of the type of tenant and covenant that I've got. So all in all, the schedule of condition has had a negative impact upon my reversionary value, and in my view, has had quite a detrimental effect.
Moan, moan, moan. As my old grandmother used to say, the hand that takes never tires, eh? So I think that Neil is winging it, really. First of all, the fact that the property has been relet and that the new tenant can go in with no works done by you means that it was clearly capable of full and beneficial occupation. It couldn't have been that bad, okay? Then secondly, because of the schedule of condition, you're getting the full rent as if the property was in full repair because the tenant hasn't got any extraordinary obligations, has it? So they're excluded from the stuff that might be the time bombs, if you like. So they must be paying the full rent. I mean, I haven't analysed it and got any comparables as yet, but they must be getting you must be getting the full rent. It's also naive to think that the new tenant is in the clear, of course, because seldom, if ever, does a landlord accept a corresponding covenant to undertake works that the tenant is excluded from undertaking by the schedule of condition. So the tenant here could still end up, the new tenant that you have could still end up being caught out for repairs. Firstly, things that fail during the term could be in such a bad state that the tenant has to put them right. For example, a flat roof out the back could fail and leak. You're not going to fix it, So therefore, the new tenant, yes, it's excluded in their schedule of condition. They'll still have to remedy that. Then at the end of the lease, anything that's recorded in the schedule of condition that's deteriorated even just a tiny bit further, that's the tenant's responsibility to fix. And of course, the best analogy for that is the part rotted windowsill. So that might be noted in the schedule of condition as 1/3 rotted. By the time it comes to lease expiry, it's 2/3 rotted. You can't fix just the one bit of rot that occurred during the currency of your lease. You've got to repair the whole thing. So I would suggest that at the end of this lease, and yeah, they're not a great covenant, but you know, they're good enough. You wouldn't have accepted them if they were that rubbish. And at the end of the term, you will have had, no doubt, some works done by the tenant that were in their schedule of condition anyway, because they will have failed to such an extent they had no choice but to attend to them. And then others will have deteriorated further by lease expiry again. You'll get them on that. So I don't think there's any loss at all. I think you're getting the full rent that you would have got because of that schedule of condition. The property can't be that bad because the tenant's taken up occupation. And by the end of the lease, notwithstanding the schedule of condition, the tenant is going to either have had to do some works during the lease just to stop water ingress or further damage in the property, and then you'll get them on other things at lease expiry because they've deteriorated further. So some conclusions from what we've both discussed. I'll let Neil kick off with the first two.
So yeah, from my point of view, and I suppose from Paul's point of view, it's each case on their own merit. And I think in particular, schedules of conditions on older stock that comes down to the age, character and locality, but older stock where there's always going to be a limited market regardless of condition, I think will have less of impact on value than on newer stock where schedules of conditions have been undertaken purely to protect. But what we find also is schedules of conditions are undertaken on properties that have been refurbished, and tenants automatically require schedule of conditions regardless of the specific condition that they've been taken in, because it's just their standard requirements. I think it is each case on its own merit, and it also depends, I think, what that schedule of condition actually identifies, the works that the schedule of condition identifies, and whether they impact on value regardless of when they're undertaken, if they were undertaken at the valuation date, or if they're undertaken, or if they need to be undertaken at the end of the new lease.
So a couple of things I would add there that have come out of what we've discussed. The well-advised tenant taking a property with a schedule of condition will or should be aware that things could go wrong during the term that the landlord does not have a corresponding direct obligation to remedy, and they'll be caught out by that. And also that if things deteriorate that are in the schedule of condition but deteriorate further by lease expiry, the tenant will also be caught on those. So the rent may well be less than full open market rent, and that's where a valuer's input is required to look at the rental evidence, the comparable rental evidence, and advise whether or not the full rental value has been secured. And the last piece of advice we'd give, certainly for tenants, certainly taking leases with a schedule of condition, is wherever possible, wherever you can in negotiations, depending on the level of competition for the property, which may of course be muted in the prevailing climate, ensure your solicitor does their level best to have a positive obligation upon the landlord to remedy certainly the most serious items highlighted in the schedule of condition if they fail. For example, if a roof fails altogether, don't leave it silent as to who's responsible for it, otherwise it will fall back on you as the tenant. And to conclude, as we'll say in all of these seminars, every case does of course turn on its own merits. Thank you very much indeed.